India is a strange country. It's a country of contradictions. It's a country of Gandhi as well as his murderer, and his name was Nathu Ram Godse, and it was sort of a political stance of many people. It still is that Gandhi was doing more harm than good to the country. And it's very interesting when you listen to his speech or read it, the kind of arguments he made and justified by saying the same thing, that Gandhi was a source of more harm than good to the country. So it's quite interesting to notice this phenomenon that along Gandhi also, you wouldn't say that he's a polarizing figure, but the politics over here in India is quite polarized. So I thought, why not read this literature as well, which might be offensive, might not be suitable to everybody's taste, but still we give freedom to people, even if they are murderers, to express themselves, and we too should have freedom to read those sort of texts and see whether that makes sense or not, or how does a killer think. Whatever your intention is, it's always a good idea to venture into these difficult territories. So here I'm going to be reading certain parts from this very short book. It's called Why I Killed the Mahatma by Nathu Ram Godse, of course. And as you would know, he was accused and proven guilty. He accepted it. He was the murderer, and then he was hanged for the same reason. So let me read the following quote from the book. He says, "In my writings and speeches, I've always advocated that the religious and communal consideration should be entirely eschewed in the public affairs of the country, at elections, inside and outside the legislatures, and in the making and unmaking of cabinets. I have throughout stood for a secular state with joint electorates, and to my mind, this is the only sensible thing to do." So as you can see from this quote, he's making a point that it's not just about religion. Many people think that Nathu Ram Godse, since he was a Hindu nationalist, it was about the fact that Gandhi was favoring secularism and wanted equal rights for everybody, including Muslims. So that was the problem. That doesn't seem to be the problem according to his arguments. And then he gets to another point, which is, he says, under the influence of the Congress, this ideal was steadily making headway amongst the Hindus. But the Muslims as a community first stood aloof, and later on, under the corroding influence of the divide and rule policy of foreign masters, were encouraged to cherish the ambition of dominating the Hindus. The first indication of this outlook was the demand for separate electorates instigated by the then Viceroy Lord Minto in 1906. The British government accepted this demand under the excuse of minority protection. While the Congress party offered a verbal opposition, it progressively supported separatism by ultimately adopting the notorious formula of neither accepting nor rejecting. Thus had originated and intensified the demand for the disintegration of this country. What was the thin end of the wedge in the beginning became Pakistan in the end. The mistake, however, was begun with the laudable object of bringing out a united front amongst all classes in India in order to drive out the foreigner, and it was hoped that separatism would eventually disappear. So here you can see he's He's making a point about the creation of Pakistan. And his main objections are with the identity politics, minority identity politics that was being played in the name of secularism. And that had offended, in fact, and that still offends till day to many people in this country. Then he further says, in spite of my advocacy for joint electorates, in principle I reconciled myself with the temporary introduction of separate electorates since the Muslims were keen on them. I, however, insisted that representation should be granted in strict proportion to the number of every community and no more. I have uniformly maintained this stand. So, at this point, he's trying to remind the listener or the reader that he has in fact made certain compromises for the sake of country in terms of politics. I mean, we're talking about the principles only. Of course, he didn't have any influence as a politician or anybody, but it's just that the point of view that we are considering. He says, under the inspiration of our British masters on the one hand, and the encouragement by the Congress under Gandhiji's leadership on the other, the Muslim League went on increasing its demands on communal basis. The Muslim community continuously backed the Muslim League. Each successive election proved that the Muslim League was able to bank on the fanaticism and ignorance of the Muslim masses, and the League was thus encouraged in its policy of separatism on an ever-increasing scale year after year. So now he makes many claims, as you can see, on the identity politics and how in the name of secularism, in the name of identity politics, both Britishers and the Congress party under the leadership of Gandhi, they were kind of being held hostage by the Muslim League. So what about Gandhi then? What about Gandhi's policies? What does he say on that? He says, since the year 1920, that is to say after the demise of Lokmanya Tilak, Gandhiji's influence in the Congress first increased and then became supreme. His activities for public awakening were phenomenal in their intensity and were reinforced by the slogan of truth and non-violence, which he ostentatiously paraded before the country. No sensible or enlightened person could object to these slogans. In fact, there is nothing new or original in them. They are implicit in every constitutional public movement. To imagine that the bulk of mankind is or can never become capable of scrupulous adherence to these lofty principles in its normal life from day to day is a mere dream. In fact, honor, duty, and love of one's own kids and kin and country might often compel us to disregard non-violence. I could never conceive that an armed resistance to the aggressor is unjust. I will consider it a religious and moral duty to resist and, if possible, to overpower such an enemy with the use of force. So, upon returning to India from South Africa, Gandhiji began his work by starting an ashram in Ahmedabad on the banks of the Sabarmati River and made truth and non-violence his slogans. He had often acted contrary to his professed principles, and if it was for appeasing the Muslims, he hardly had any scruple in doing so. Truth and non-violence are excellent as an ideal and admirable as guides in action. They are, however, to be practiced in actual day-to-day life and not in the air. I'm showing later on that Gandhiji himself was guilty of glaring breaches of his much wanted ideals. So now he gets to the point about Mahatma Gandhi, that according to him that Gandhi was not really following his own principles very well, and he's indicating some kind of hypocrisy here on the part of Gandhi, of course. So let's see what are the objections. He says, there is no doubt in my mind that in the majority of quarrels, the Hindus come out second best. But my own experience confirms the opinion that the Muslim as a rule is a bully and the Hindu as a rule is a coward. I have noticed this in railway trains, on public roads, and in the quarrels which I had the privilege of settling. Need the Hindu blame the Muslim for his cowardice? Where there are cowards, there will always be bullies. So now we get to the point. Now, although in the beginning he was making that it's not about religion, he was making that claim, eventually you see it comes to the religion and comes to the conflict between the Hindus and the Muslims. And it seems from here, in fact, it is very clear that he has major problems with Muslims. And that could be based on his own experience. But to make such claims on the entire Muslim society based on his own experience, that does not sound right at all. Let's see further. They say that in Saharanpur the Muslims looted houses, broke open safes, and in one case a Hindu woman's modesty was outraged. Whose fault was this? Muslims can offer no defense for the execrable conduct, it is true, but I as a Hindu am more ashamed of Hindu cowardice than I am angry at the Muslim bullying. So now you see how he is thinking. He is, for these kind of acts, let's say if he is witnessing that Muslims are discriminating against or killing Hindus, he is not blaming Muslims for that. He is blaming Hindus who are preaching peace probably and are not fighting and are not dealing the bully with the same attitude. So he doesn't like that. So it's really the insecurity on his part that if somebody, he identifies with his community as a Hindu, and if other Hindus are not fighting against Muslims, he feels as if he's being let down. And another problem you can see that he's just making claims that only Muslims are doing those violent acts, but since the whole thing was after the independence of India, after the partition of India and Pakistan happened, in which both sides, Hindus killed Muslims, Muslims killed Hindus, and Sikhs and Hindus were fighting together against Muslims. So you can't really make this claim. This doesn't look justifiable. But we have to remind ourselves we are talking about a murderer here, so might not be reasonable all the time. Then he gets to the religion by initially making a claim that he wasn't talking about religion. Then he quotes many gods and the examples where he says that even in Hinduism, where we talk about peace, at some point if you have no other choice left, you have to fight. So then he makes the same claim again and criticizes Gandhi on those grounds. And in his world, probably according to him, he's being pragmatic, but he feels that Hindus and Muslims, they can't be united, you can't do much. When Muslims are saying they want another country, you can't really forcefully keep them with you. And it's just that it's just the kind of hatred that had grown over a long period of time, probably through various actions that Gandhi took. Godse found himself almost probably on the opposite end. Another interesting claim that he makes is he thinks that British had completely succeeded in their divide and rule policy, in which Hindus and Muslims, they were completely divided, they were against each other. And Gandhi had this really fantastical dream that that the two could live together and work together towards the freedom of India, which, according to Godse, never happened. They were fighting for their own independence, separate from Hindus. And Gandhi, according to Godse, just couldn't grasp this fact and just kept pretending that he is with Muslims. And more importantly, he pretended that Muslims are with him. And from his own side, Gandhi tried everything that he could to please the Muslims. For example, he participated in Khilafat movement, which was really about resurrection of the caliphate in Turkey, which was really a bad idea if you think about it. But since Gandhi was thinking about bringing unity in Hindus and Muslims, he was trying to please even the extreme elements in Muslims, and that was probably a bad idea even for moderate Hindus or Muslims. And the whole thing continued for a long time, even in the 1940s, when we were getting towards this process where India was going to be created and Pakistan was going to be created for Muslims. Pakistan Muslim League's leader, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he wanted separate nation for Muslims, and Gandhi kept trying that the nation could remain united. So he offered the seat of prime ministership to Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He offered the entire cabinet to Muslim community, and he was fine with that he was making such offerings just to please certain groups of people. And it is because of this reason you would find that in the 1940s, late 1940s, Gandhi stopped having that kind of mass following as he used to have in the previous decades, because some people, especially Hindus and even Muslims, I'll talk about that in a bit, and especially Hindus, they were not really liking this kind of approach, that he was just giving up everything on behalf of all the Hindus and was trying to please Muslims. And on the other hand, even Muslims didn't like that kind of attitude. They surely appreciated that he was being peaceful, he was still advocating those his principles of non-violence and truth. But this was politics. And you can understand this mode of politics sounds a bit bizarre. And many hoped that these troubles would end at some point when India would attain independence or Pakistan would be created. But that didn't happen. In fact, the opposite happened. When Pakistan was created, many more riots happened during the partition, and the worst part was most of the minorities which resided in Pakistan, which happened to live in Pakistan at that time, they were very quickly wiped out, be it Hindus or Sikhs or Christians or Parsis. They were attacked all the time, and they had to leave Pakistan and come to India. And even at that point, Gandhi's stance by refusing to stand up against this kind of fanatic politics coming from Pakistan, that really hurt a lot of people in India. Because after all, he had a lot of influence worldwide in India and even in Pakistan. And many believed that he just let it happen. So eventually he goes on to say, Nathu Ram Godse, he says, the accumulating provocation of 32 years culminating in his last pro-Muslim fast goaded me to the conclusion that the existence of Gandhiji should be brought to an end immediately. If the country wanted his leadership, it had to accept his infallibility. If it did not, he would stand aloof from the Congress and carry on in his own way. Against such an attitude, there can be no halfway house. Either the Congress had to surrender its will to his and had to be content with playing the second fiddle to all his eccentricity, whimsicality, metaphysics, and primitive vision, or it had to carry on without him. So this sounds like a sudden jump, but there you can see his justification. He is saying that I am taking upon myself this responsibility, which probably Congress wants but doesn't want to do. And eventually he just blackmails and goes on with his own points of views. He doesn't care about the country, doesn't care about his people, but just that what his principles are, what his philosophy is. And that seemed nauseating to Nathu Ram Godse. So you can see a lot of problems in this lines of argument, but that's the story you would hear, and it's not an uncommon story here in India, that Gandhi didn't really do a good job. He did a great job in bringing the masses together, and when it came to fighting against the British, but there was so much chaos at that time. The country was getting divided internally, and while it was fighting the external enemy, which was the British. And according to which side you are on, people have their views. Some think Gandhi was right in all the things he did, and some think that he did horrible things. But as we know that history is the best judge, and we are at some point in history, at this point also we can make our judgments. Maybe in the future generations they will have their separate judgments, maybe they'll have the same judgments as us. We'll leave that to the history.